What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another episode of Under the Radar for you guys. This week we're taking a look at albums that came out the weekend of August 19th, and there were quite a few that came out that caught my eye, and the first one we're going to be talking about is an album from a band I never heard of until now, from Germany, Parasite Incorporated with Cyan Night Dreams. So this is a German melodic death metal band, or at least that's what Metal Archives describe them as. Although I could make an argument there are some metalcore going on in here too, because I listened to this album and I was looking at Parasite Inc.'s Metal Archives page, saw they were like compared to bands like Children of Bodom and Arch Enemy and Carcass and At the Gates, like the standard melodic death metal bands. So here I was thinking, I'm in for actually maybe a really good Melodeath album. And as I listened to it, there are definitely some moments on here for sure that remind me of Arch Enemy, and there's even some like cool leads and like thrashy bits that kind of remind me of Children of Bodom, and even some rhythms that kind of remind me of like Amon Amarth. But the longer I listened to it, the vocals kind of waned on me a little bit. Like, the vocals were more or less like a metalcore scream, for the most part. There are some clean vocals on here, which kind of lends credence to maybe considering this metalcore. But there are solos on a good chunk of this album, so it's kind of like a hybrid almost of metalcore and melodic death metal, kind of like Darkest Hour to some degree, or even like middle era In Flames to some extent. So songwriting wise, it's not bad, it's solid. It is kind of derivative of some of those bands that I just mentioned, but they do it in their own way, which is cool. However, I was kind of disappointed because I was expecting this to be like heavy, brutal, melodic death metal, which there are some brutal moments, especially in the second track, the way it opens with a big, powerful riff. That was really like one of the big standouts for me on this whole album. Other than that, didn't really capture me as much. Not saying it's a bad album, it's a solid album for what it is, and for those reasons, I give this album a 7.5 out of 10. It's solid, it's good, but nothing spectacular, if that makes any sense. So, but yeah, respectable offering here, but just wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. Now for the next album on this episode, we are talking about another band I have never heard of, and that is Tuma, Finland with Across the Barren Fields. This is their third studio album, and obviously from Finland, because of the name, duh. But when I was looking up information about this band, they were listed on Metal Archives as Blackened Death Doom. But kind of, again, similar to Parasite Incorporated, kind of a misleading tag. I thought, yeah, there are Death Doom moments on here. The only thing that's really black metal on this album is that occasionally you get like the black metal vocals, but it's very sparingly used on this album. This is mostly death metal vocals all the way through. And really, this album kind of is almost like a tale of two halves. Like, the first half feels like a traditional melodic death metal album, and it's the kind of melodic death metal I like, where it's still very much brutal in the death metal sense, but with great melodies and epic qualities on top. The second half still retains that vibe, but it does get much more doomy, and it's slower in the second half. So, honestly, like, calling them Blackened Death Doom, I think is kind of misleading. Melodic Death Doom, I think it's a little more accurate, more so on the melodic death metal side, but regardless of how you want to label them, I thought this album was actually really, really good. Like, the marching riffs that you get in the first half almost kind of felt like Amon Amarth to some degree. The guitar tone on this album is crushing on here. Like, it almost felt like mixing the guitar tones of At the Gates, Entombed, and Hooded Menace together, where it almost sounds like HM2, but I don't think it's HM2, it's just the way the guitars are tuned to be. And it also does sound like they might have been using the Metal Zone pedal too, so it kind of gives off that like At the Gates, Hooded Menace, and Tomb vibe in the guitar tone. And overall with like the songwriting, like I said, first half feels very much like a traditional melodic death metal album. Second half, like melodic death with some doom in there. So if you are a fan of melodic death metal and death doom, I say this one will be a good one for you to check it out. I actually really like this one. I give this one an 8.5 out of 10. This was a really enjoyable listen for me, and definitely look forward to hearing what this band has in store for their next album, whenever that may come. Now on to the next album for this episode, and that is by the Sombre, or the Sombre, I think it's Sombre, but with the ER backwards, with their album Monuments of Grief. So this is another new band that I've checked out as I was going through the release list on Metal Archives, and I saw this and saw it was Death Doom, so I'm like, this could be something really cool. And we get to this album, and they're a Dutch band, they're from the Netherlands, and I listened to it, and I read descriptors that they were trying to go for more of that early Peaceville 3 sound, of like early Paradise Lost, early My Dying Bride, and early Anathema. Honestly, it sounds closer to My Dying Bride and Anathema. Paradise Lost early Death Doom stuff was definitely more traditional Death Doom as opposed to like this style of Death Doom, which is more melodic, more grandiose, and borderline funeral doom at times. Like, this album's very slow, but it's a short album. It's only like 38 minutes, which is unusual, I think, for a Death Doom album, especially of this style. But yeah, it definitely harkens back to, say, like As the Flower Withers by My Dying Bride, or like the early Anathema stuff from the early 90s. Because you got a lot of strings going on here, there's a ton of atmosphere happening. So it's definitely more like melodic, atmospheric Death Doom, but with like borders to Funeral Doom because of just how slow and cerebral it is. But it's very dreary and murky and dark, depressive at times. Like, it's definitely a depressing sounding album for sure. And the production, it sounds like almost like as if it was recorded at the bottom of the sea, similar to Funeral Doom albums as it sounds. But overall, I do appreciate the atmosphere of this album. However, not quite there for me personally. Of course, everybody's different, has their own opinion. This one didn't do as much for me. It's still better than, I would say, the Parasite Incorporated album. I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. This is solid for what it is. If you appreciate like atmospheric, dreary stuff, this will be up your alley. For me, when it comes to Death Doom, if you're going for that more melodic, depressing sound, I'd like to hear a little bit of chunk to it. There is plenty of chunk on here, but not enough for my taste. But again, that's just me. Now for the next album, away from the death metal and onto some thrash, as we are talking about Eruption with Tellurian Rupture. So this is, I believe, the third studio album from this Slovenian thrash metal act. And upon doing research about this band, yeah, they're a thrash band, and seen them often compared to a lot of the old school thrash, like Megadeth, Metallica, Exodus, but also some Artillery and Sanctuary, and even Nevermore, because the vocalist does kind of remind me a little bit of Warrell Dane during his time in Sanctuary when he was doing the more higher, almost power metal type vocals. And that's what you get for the vocal delivery on this album for the most part. Granted, at times, when he's trying to be like Warrell Dane, it kind of sounds like he's not doing as good of a job as he could, but other times, he nails it, especially in the clean parts on the track Praise the Serpent Queen. Like, those clean vocals were just so perfect for that song. And in terms of the music, plenty thrash, plenty of like old school metal mentality. It's just heavy, aggressive. Like, there are some Metallica riffs going on all over the place. There's even some Megadeth moments, some Exodus moments, some Testament moments. It's like basically this band is kind of an all-encompassing, like, American thrash sounding band from Europe, but mixing in the more higher vocals of Warrell Dane and the vocalist from Artillery. And I honestly think this album kicked some serious ass. Maybe the only complaint I have is that this album's over 50 minutes, but they pack so much in those 50 minutes, and there are a couple of tracks that do kind of feel like they overstay their welcome at times. But aside from that, and also the occasional vocal mishaps, I really like this one. I think so far, out of all the ones we've talked about this week, this might be the best one of the bunch. I give this one an 8.5 out of 10. Really, really good stuff right here, and a young, upcoming band, and, well, I would hope they get a chance to open for some bigger acts in the future. But yeah, 8.5 out of 10 for Eruption. And then for the final album I'm talking about for this week's Under the Radar, it is the latest offering from British stoner sludge doom metal band Conan with their album Evidence of Immortality. So this has been a band that I've heard the name get floated around quite a bit over the past several years. Never gave them a shot until this new album came out because, well, I do enjoy doom, I do enjoy sludge from time to time, stoner from time to time, but this right here, wow, is this album heavy or what? I mean, the guitar tone on this album, it's just so crushing, it's crunchy, it's dirty, nasty, every adjective you can think of for the word gross. Like, the guitar tone on this album is gross, the bass tone on this album is gross. As far as the music behind it, it's like the bookend tracks are the longest tracks. The first track 10 minutes, the final track nearly 15. And both have a lot of different, well, the opening track has some different things going for it. Like, it starts off more funeral doom, and then it becomes like sludge doom. Then the tracks in between, they kind of vary from like the sludginess to the doominess. I don't really hear much of a stoner vibe because this album's just way too heavy and aggressive to be a stoner album, at least in my mind. You get some D-beat chugs, some Black Sabbath moments, and then the final track, the 15-minute closer, that's a funeral doom instrumental of just creepiness, haunting quality, darkness. Like, pretty much this whole album's like an amalgamation of everything doom. Like, you get your classic doom, your sludge stuff, your funeral doom stuff, and even, yeah, it's very much all over the map when it comes to doom. Now, as far as like any complaints I could really have, really, I don't really have any. Actually, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, out of everything, including the Soilwork album that came out the week of August 19th, this was the best of the bunch. I give this one a 9 out of 10. This is a great album. If you like heavy, oppressive sludge, doom, and funeral doom, this is right up your alley. I enjoyed this album from top to bottom. It's only 6 tracks, but it's nearly 51 minutes, so it definitely has a lot going for it, but it's well worth it in the end. And that does it for this week's episode of Under the Radar. What was your favorite album that came out on August 19th? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, horns high. See you guys later. At number 30, we have Dream Theater's A View from the Top of the World. Yeah, this is probably, in my opinion, the best Dream Theater album since Octavarium, and that was 16 years ago when that album came out. I think it's that good. Like, it's also more riff-oriented for me than most Dream Theater albums as of late. I thought this was a little bit better than Distance Over Time, way better than the Astonishing. Hell, if there's an album in my collection I would sell first, it would be The Astonishing. I did buy it when it came out. And yeah, I haven't gone back to it really at all since, except for one song, Heaven's Cove. But that's the astonishing